Welcome. Thanks everybody for coming. My name is David. Today we're talking about Microsoft Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud compute platform, owned and run by Microsoft, but we want to talk about Microsoft Azure without Microsoft. My name is David. I'm a technical evangelist. I come from the United States of America, from the great city of Chicago. This is some contact information for me. Follow me online. These are pictures of my last trip to Australia in 1998. I'm very excited to be back here. Are there any Australians actually in the audience right now? Yeah, about a dozen in the back there. Thanks. So Azure. How many people are using Azure today? Most of the audience is. So you know the compelling story around Azure. It is cloud computing. It allows you to rent hardware instead of buying it, so that results in lower capital costs and but more than that, it provides hyperscaling, the ability to scale your application out almost infinitely, very rapidly, and then to scale it back down again when you want to save some costs. That kind of elasticity can be a real cost savings if you have demand that goes up and down. For example, if you're selling concert tickets that are really high demand the day of the on sale, but drop off after they're all sold out. It provides redundancy. It provides automatic distribution around the world, and it's really a nice solution if you want to reduce your expenses. But it is Microsoft Azure, and what happens if you're not using any Microsoft technology? Is it still relevant? And this is a conversation that I have a lot with startups in America. I talk to, because a lot of startups, they're not using Microsoft technology. They're using Ruby, or they're using Java, or they're writing iPhone apps. They're using open source software or Node. And I'll talk to them about Microsoft technology. I'll talk to them about Azure, and their immediate response is, no, I'm really not interested in that because we don't use any Microsoft products. And so I have this conversation a lot to say, you know what? Just because you're not using any Microsoft products does not mean Azure is not relevant to you. There are a lot of pieces of Azure that you can take advantage of, so you can have that high scalability and low cost and elasticity and the built-in redundancy, even if you're using open source or even competing technologies. They all work within Microsoft Azure. And I'm going to talk about that now. So I had that conversation so many times that I decided to turn it into a talk and share it with the hundreds of people that are here today. These are some of the things that I'm going to talk about here. I'm going to just skip over this slide because I want to get right to them. The first thing is virtual machines. Now, virtual machines aren't new. They've been around a long time, and they're a more efficient way of using hardware. They allow you to make machines portable, move them from one to another, and to make copies of them very quickly. They're great for the cloud. So the cloud allows you to, clouds like Microsoft Azure, allow you to spin up a virtual machine, and then it's just a machine just like you own it, except that it's hosted by Microsoft. And there are templates. There are templates to make this easy for you. So when you create a virtual machine, you're asked questions like, what size machine do you want? How much memory? How big is the hard drive? And what operating system do you want on that machine? And not surprisingly, you have an option to put Windows Server 2012 or 2016, I think is the latest one, different service packs. You also have the option to put Windows with SQL Server or various Microsoft technologies. There are templates built in to make that easy. That's not surprising at all, but what you might be surprised to learn is that there are various distributions of Linux that are available. So if you want to create an OpenSUSE server or a Red Hat server or an Ubuntu server, there are distributions of Linux pre-built for you to quickly deploy these virtual machines to Azure. And if they're not there, you can, of course, install your own. It's your machine. You can install whatever you want on there. So here's a screenshot I took a few months ago of various Red Hat and Oracle Linux and things that have nothing to do with Microsoft. There are machines that actually have Oracle installed on them, some on Windows, some on Linux. And there are some that have machines that have open source software. So if you wanted a virtual machine that had the mean stack installed, what is that, Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node, I think, or the LAMP stack, this is open source software. There are machines that are pre-built that you can start using right away with this software. So let me show you how to do this. I hope that the Wi-Fi, or my internet access cooperates here. This is the Azure portal. For those of you that are not using Azure, to get started, I'll show you right here. The thing to remember is azure.com. Just go to azure.com. It's actually azure.microsoft.com. And if you don't have it yet, you can create a free account right here and start playing around with it. You get a 30-day free account. And then I click on the portal, and that brings me up to here. This is the portal. with something open. I wanted to show you the very top of the portal here. Before I open anything, azure.com. And here we got a nice dashboard. It's very HTML5-ish, and it's actually pretty responsive here. The Wi-Fi here, I'll say it again, it's not the best, but even given that as much as this does, this is actually pretty snappy. Now, I'll close that up. And you can see things like the health of the various regions around the country, and I can pin things to the dashboard here if I want to. If I want to create a new virtual machine, I click this big plus new button right here. And right here are my virtual machines. And when I go into virtual machines, you'll see there's some popular templates. Windows Server 2012 R2 Data Center. Of course, that's a Microsoft thing. But right below that is Ubuntu Server. And I can grab that, and it asks me a few questions. One is just click Create. And it'll ask me things like, what size machine do I want to do? That's basic stuff. What's my authentication mechanism? What's the name of this machine? So I'll create a machine here. I'll call it DG Test 0804, which is today's date. What kind of disks do I want? I don't want solid state drives, they're more expensive. I'll skip that. I can put a username that I'm going to log in with. I'll use my first initial last name. And I can use a SSH public key or a password. I'll go with the password here. Oops. And resource groups, this is a way of organizing your machines if you want to manage them all together. I like to put these into a resource group that I can, because it's a demo that I can easily get rid of next time I use this. So I have a resource group that I created yesterday called DG Test 08, there it is, 0803 RG for resource group. 0803 RG. Right there. I could put it where I want to. In this case, East Asia is the closest one. There isn't a data center in Australia, but there is one in East Asia, so I'll grab that one. And I must be missing a piece of information. Oh, there it is. It's waiting. And then I can click OK. And I'm just going to let that run. It'll take about 10 minutes to spin this up. Oh, I'm sorry. There's more to this. There are a couple other things here that I want to add. This is not awkward silence for me. It's only awkward for you. Here we go. I can select a size. The larger machine, the more that I will pay. There's an hourly rate quoted in here. And if you click at on the pricing, it'll tell you what that is. But I'm going to delete this tonight, so I'm not going to pay much for it at all. Come down here into settings, and I can change things like where do I want to store this machine. If I want to create a virtual network, I could do that. All this stuff is, it's not really necessary, or some of it is not necessary. And I'll just take the defaults and click on OK. And once I've done that, this next screen is just read-only. It tells me what I've selected. I can really quickly review to make sure it's all good and click OK. And at this point, it'll take about 10 minutes. So I won't show you I won't wait around for this to happen. But then I'll have a virtual machine that's running Ubuntu. And I can SSH into that, and I can use it as just like my machine. And in fact, about 30% of the servers that are running on Azure today are some version of Linux. So this has been a really successful tool for a lot of people that have no desire whatsoever to use any other Microsoft technology, but they want to take advantage of the strengths of Azure. All right. Next thing I'll talk about is web apps. And web apps are a really popular way of using Azure because they're so simple. They're simple and they're very inexpensive. Web apps, of course, the Microsoft web technology is ASP.NET, and ASP.NET Core was just released. We saw a few sessions on that, and that's fully supported. Runs on top of IIS, but IIS is a very powerful tool, and it will support running Java applications. It'll support running Node applications. It'll support running Python or PHP applications. And so all those things are available to you. If you wanted to write your own Node application and deploy it to Azure, you can do so. And if you wanted to take advantage of some of the things that are built on top of these other platforms, the other languages, like WordPress or Drupal, that are built in PHP, those are fully supported. And there are templates to make that easy. So if you want to go in and select, for example, a Joomla site, Joomla I believe is built with PHP and it has MySQL on the back end. There's no Microsoft technology in that at all, but there's a template inside of Azure, and there's a wizard that'll just walk you through creating that. For Node.js, you can create an empty Node.js. If you're proficient with Node, you probably want to do that, write your code and then deploy it. It'll take care of importing any packages automatically for you. But there's also a starter site, so if you're new to Node, it's a really nice way to get started with this Node.js starter site, or even if you just like the way they've done the starter site, you want to use that as your own starter to save you a bit of the plumbing, that's available as well. So let me show you a quick demo of some other languages that are supported in Azure. I have created a web app here called Demo Multilang. And if I browse to this, you'll see that I've got some links here to some ASP.NET sites and Classic ASP is actually still supported on Azure. But here's a Node site right here that's running some Node. Here's a Python site here. And this PHP site worked yesterday, but I ran out of just a few minutes ago and it didn't work. I'm not really sure why it's not working today. But the source code for these are all written in various languages. So I have, here we go. Right here, this is the Node code right here. Now, it's a very simple Node application. You can see it's running JavaScript on the server. It's fully functional inside of Azure. I didn't have to really do anything special to make this work. Here's the Python code. I've never written a line of Python in my life, but I can see that here we're just yielding out the message hello world in Python. And here's the PHP code right here, which, again, I'm a novice as far as PHP is concerned, but I can see that it's here and it's just echoing out a hello world. And so the language itself is supported on Azure. And if you want to configure that, in the portal, we have under application settings, we can turn this on or turn it off. We can set the versions of Python that we want to use. It's all set here under application settings. And right here, this is where we set the .NET framework version. But we also have the, that's probably why my problem is my PHP version is off. And set that right there. Java I've got turned off because I'm not running that. I want to save some resources. Python is version 3.4. There may be breaking changes between these two versions, so I might want to fiddle with that. And I don't think there's anything for Node. Node just works out of the box, so it's all available in here. Also, I can do this. If I want to create a new application that's pre-built using something like WordPress. So WordPress is built with PHP and MySQL, two popular open source technologies, but it's fully supported on Azure. So if I say new web and mobile, right here are some popular things, the web app and API app. I'm not going to cover those today, but I can click on See All. And in here, I actually have a template for WordPress. And I select that, it'll actually walk me through creating a WordPress application. So in here, I can give it a name, DG Test 0804, how about WP for WordPress? In my resource group, I'll put them all in the same resource group, makes it a little easier for me to manage later on. DG Test 0803. MySQL database, I think I have one created, I can't remember. If not, I can create one here. Looks like I don't have one created, so I'd have to go in here and DG Test 0803 MySQL, I'll name it. And I've got an error here. Why do I have an error? I have your database name is a reserved word, including, I can't put the word MySQL in there. So, all right. I didn't know, okay. And Brazil seems like an odd place to put it. I'll put it somewhere. East Asia is fine. And click on Create. Please fix the errors. Oh, I didn't scroll down enough. There are a couple of questions down here. Oh, I have to say I accept this. Make sure you read the end user licensing thoroughly before you select, agree to it. This. So, oh, here we go. This is the, there's a free version and there's the $3.50 per month. So I must have used my free version already. So I'm not going to select this here. I don't want to pay even $3.50, so I'm kind of cheap. That's, even for me, that's too much to pay. But you do get a free version of MySQL. What some people will do is they will, instead of installing on MySQL, they'll install it on SQL Server. And there is a tool, it's, I think it's Project Naria or something like that, that basically changes the data layer of WordPress to point to SQL Server, because SQL Server on Azure has more scalable options. So I've seen people do that as well. And if I go through here and accept these legal terms, then it'll create a WordPress site for me. I'll fire it up, and then it'll ask me questions about what's the style of your WordPress, what's the title of it, what things like that, things that are just automatic for WordPress. WordPress is great because you can hand it off to your Aunt Mary, who wants you to build a website for her flower shop, and then she won't be calling you all the time because you can use WordPress and configure it without knowing a lot of HTML or JavaScript or coding of any kind. Okay, these are some great technologies for web applications. Let's go back here. Automated deployments. So if you're working with open source technology, chances are you've run into Git and GitHub. They're the deployment tools that are the source control repository that are most popular for open source technologies. And Microsoft is migrating a lot of our open source technologies onto GitHub. Plus, we're integrating Git and GitHub into our deployment processes. And so if you're using Git to store your Git or GitHub to store your source code, getting that to deploy to Azure is very simple. When you create a new application, you have the option to wire that up to any source control you want. What happened? Here we go. All right. To any source control you want. So it supported our Visual Studio Team Services. This is the online version of TFS. That's Microsoft's source control repository, or in fact, it's Microsoft's entire application lifecycle management tool. And that's, of course, supported. If you want to use that, that's great. Go ahead and feel free to use it. But if you wanted to use any one of these other ones, OneDrive, local Git repository, GitHub, Bitbucket, even Dropbox. I'm not sure who would use Dropbox for source control repository, but it's supported there, and you can do it. And if there's a click external, then you have some more configuration options. So I've already done that. I have an application that I'll show you how to automatically deploy from Git. In this application, close that, close that, close that. So in fact, if I go, let me really quickly go to an application I showed you earlier. For this one right here, if this one isn't tied to any source control at all, it's a really simple application. I just copied some files up via FTP. But if I wanted to do automated deployment, I can tie that to a source control repository right here under, where am I? Publishing deployment source. And you can see the options that are available right here, come on. Right here. And so I've done that already with this application, right? Called Demo Azure Deploy. And if you look at this one, I'll bring it up in the browser. It's a web app. This one happens to be built with ASP.NET, but it's not really using a whole lot from the ASP.NET. And if I look at my, let's see. Demo Azure Deploy. If I open this up, I've initialized a Git repository where this is stored. So I can make changes to it and automatically publish those changes to Azure simply by pushing those changes in Git. So here's my page. It's just got one page in it. Git and Azure are awesome, and so is Sydney. How about that? Save that. There is my major change. And if I open up a command prompt, and go to that right there. Then I could do git add dot, what is it, git commit Sydney demo. How about that? I don't have to spell it right, but I probably should. Demo, right here. Oh, I'm sorry, it's -m, right? Any Git people in the audience? Did I do what I did wrong? Git commit -m. What did I miss? I spelled it wrong. Oh, okay, thank you. All right, and then it's what is it? Git push origin master. Now to do this, you also have to do a git init and tie it up to the repository. But my repository is just the files on Azure, and so it knows that when I push to origin master, it'll automatically push to my Azure account. So I only changed one file. It shouldn't take very long as it can connect. Here we go. Ordinarily, actually, in the real world, you probably would not push to master. You'd probably have a staging slot, and Azure fully supports that. It's not really part of this talk, but it's, you can set up as many deployment slots as you want. So if you wanted to deploy to a staging slot, do some testing, make sure it's okay, and then from there, manually push it to production. That's what most organizations, I think, would do. But in this case, for demo purposes, we're going to push it directly to production. And there we go. And we're done. And if I open up in the browser, I should see my change automatically displayed. Yay, all right. And this is, I'll show you another nice feature of Azure, is that when you do this, then you can look at the deployments in Azure and see the deployment history. So down here, we're publishing deployment source, deployment credentials. I have, where am I here? Have these application settings. It's under the publishing, I think, slots, source, maybe it's here. Yeah, here we go. So here I see this is the deployment I made, the Sydney demo. That's my recent push to production. But if I want to roll that back, you can very quickly click this and redeploy and say redeploy. And in a matter of seconds, it'll just automatically roll back changes. So really, really fast changes. And that'll work exactly the same whether you're using GitHub or Visual Studio Team Systems or Bitbucket or Codeplex. All those are supported right out of the box. So in here, I should see, well, some of these things, that rolled my changes back to where they were about 10 minutes ago. It should have been. If I clicked it right, Control F5, did I not do it right? Here, sample change, oh, I didn't do it right. Click here. This is the, click redeploy. Oh, I probably didn't hit yes is why. And redeployment in progress, takes a few seconds, and once that's done, then I should be able to see refresh this page, and I should see that my changes are rolled back. There we go. So I think it's you'll see that there's some, you can do this manual like I did, or you can tie it into your continuous integration scripts, and it'll work just as well. What else? The SDKs. So there are a lot of SDKs that are available on Azure. Essentially, the way that Azure is managed is there are REST APIs that are available for just about everything in Azure. So if you wanted to create a new virtual machine, you can call a REST API. And you could do that. You can write your own code. It'll be just HTTP code sending up some JSON. If you wanted to store something in Azure Storage, same thing. You can use this REST API. But a lot of people don't like working with REST. And so Microsoft has built these SDKs, these tools, these libraries to make it easier. The first ones they built, of course, were for .NET. So if you want to write C# to do some of this stuff, that was really nice. But then they went and built some for other languages as well. If you go in here, you will see that there are SDKs for, where are we here? Media services, that's not what I want to see. Down here, there are SDKs for Java, there are SDKs for Ruby, where am I here? Open source, framework, licensing, .com/Azure. The wrong spot. There's a Ruby SDK, there's some PowerShell SDKs, there are some for Xamarin, some for Java here, and all sorts of, some of these are libraries, some of them are sample codes, and they're all available. I thought there was some on this as well, web jobs, all the rest. I think these are sample applications that you can use. Oh, here we go, this is what I was looking for. I didn't scroll down far enough. So here's the SDK specifically designed for Java, all these things here. So if you're a Java developer and you want to work with Azure and you want to automate things, that's all available in here. If you're working with JavaScript or Node.js, here's some tools for doing that. If you're working with Python, there are tools here for doing it. Ruby, every time I come back here, they're longer and longer. I don't remember Golang being here before, but there it is. There's SDKs available for Golang. Under the hood, all these things are doing is they're just calling REST services, because REST is cross-platform. Any platform, any language that could speak HTTP and send receive text can make a REST call. And so these are available for making it easier to interact with Azure from all these other different languages. These right here, a lot of these are utilities and sample applications. There are a lot of them. These are published by the Azure team. And so if you look down here, there are 14 pages of them, and it looks like there's, about 20 per page. So this list also is growing really well. And this is part of Microsoft's commitment to get more involved with the open source community and to share our software with other folks. So there's that. This is the github.com/Azure. That's what I just showed you. This is the Azure Teams GitHub repository, public GitHub repository. I'd encourage you to take a look at that as well. Many of those are written in C#, but they're still open sourced software. You can use them. You can even make pull requests. So if you wanted to contribute to that, read the fine print on there, and you can make a pull request yourself. If you want to do a bug fix, it's available to you. Next, I want to talk about mobile apps. Mobile apps are a tool for building back-end data stores for your mobile phone applications. So if you have a mobile application and you want to share information between all the users of your application, let's say you have a game and you want to make sure that every time I get the high score, that everybody in the world knows that I got the high score. Or maybe you have a business application when the salesman enters an order on their phone, you want that order to appear on the tablet that's out on the production floor so they can fulfill that order. Well, probably the simplest way to do that is to store that data in the cloud and have everybody access that through the cloud. And that's what Azure Mobile Apps does. It's a simple way, there's a menu for doing it, to create a REST web service that exposes back-end data stored in Azure. And because it's a REST service, and because REST is HTTP and JSON, and those are standards, we can then call that from any platform we want. We can call it from an Android application, or from an iOS application, or from a Java or a Ruby or a Python application. Those are all available to us. Here's a quick drawing I did of the mobile architecture. Here I've got one phone, I've got some data out in the cloud somewhere, and I expose that through a web service, through a REST API. Then I can read and write that data through this API. I don't have to talk to the database directly. The database calls, of course, they tend to be proprietary. REST is open. I can call that. And I get responses back, and HTTP has a real rich response messaging system where they can say, tables not found, be a 401 error. Unauthorized to log in, or a 404 be not found. 401 will be unauthorized. Things like that. If there's a backend server error, 500 and something will be the error. And then I can share that data among other users as well. And they don't have to be Windows users. They can be iPhone, iPad, Android, JavaScript, whatever platform that can speak to this web service, it can do that. What mobile apps does is it makes it easier to create these REST APIs and these backend databases. So let me show you how you do this. I'll go into my Azure portal here, and I'll say New. Web and mobile, and mobile app right here. From here, I'll give it a name. I'll call this one DG Test 0804 MA for mobile app. I'll put this in my resource group DG Test 0803 RG. That's fine there. Put it in the US East, even though I'm nowhere near there right now. Give it a second to deploy this. No more than a second, but not more than a minute. It'll create a new web service or a new web application that I can add web services to. Now, a lot of the code that this does, you could write yourself. You could create a web application, and you could create put a web service on it, and you could add security to it, and you could tie that to a backend database and write and grab JSON and turn it into SQL statements. But it's done for you. This is stuff that lots of users have to do. It's plumbing code. Your time is probably better off spent doing something else. So I've done this here. I've created this application, and let me go down here and grab it. I called it DG Test 0804, search for it. App services. DG Test 0804, there it is, mobile app, right there. I can come in here, and there's some nice tools to get this up running in a hurry. So if you want to use, create the simplest way to do it is there is a quick start down here, which will create a sample table. And I would recommend if it's the first time you use it to start doing that. So in my quick start right here, I'll say grab that. Come on in, guys. There's some room down front here. Right here, what I select here is going to tell me at some point in this is going to actually generate some client-side code. This will be the code that's used to call the mobile application, call the web service. Whichever one I pick, the web service itself will be the same. The only difference is how is that client-side code generated. So I'm going to grab one. I'll just do a C# one here because those are the tools that I have on my laptop. Here I can connect to a database. I can use an existing database, or I can create a brand new one. So I'll add a data connection. And I will connect to a SQL database. I won't add it. I'll use an existing database. I'll grab this one right here. Okay. Select that. And my contraction string, I'll have to tell it credentials to log in. There. I think I spelled that wrong. Okay. Looks like I spelled it right. Click OK, and this will connect it back to a database here. And in a few seconds, I should see my data connection appear in this area. This is 10% complete, but then it jumps to 90% complete. So it's just the crazy time that we use here in Microsoft. And from here, I'll create a table API. I actually have a choice. I can write that in C#. If I write in C#, it uses a tool called Web API to write it. But because this is an open source talk, I'm going to write it in Node.js, and I will acknowledge that I'm going to overwrite this. So if I had done this before, if I did this demo twice in a row, it would overwrite any code, any changes that I did. And then right here, I can create a sample table. It's a to-do item table. So it's a list of things to do. It'll have an ID. It'll have a task, to do, fly to Australia, and a flag, a Boolean flag is complete, true or false. So it's a real simple table that will expose as a REST web service. And when I say expose, we're going to expose the basic CRUD operations, the create, read, update, and delete. There'll be different methods to do that. And REST, if you haven't worked with REST before, REST actually works with HTTP verbs. And verbs, you probably worked with get verbs before. Whenever you click a hyperlink, a request gets sent to the server with the get verb. And usually when you fill out a form online, a request gets sent to a URL on the server with the post verb, and whatever data is in that form gets sent along with it. But there are other verbs as well that you might not be familiar with. There's a put and a patch and a delete verb, and by default with REST, those are mapped to the CRUD operations. So whenever we post data, then by convention, we expect that we will be creating some data on the back end. If we set it with a get verb, we expect that we'll be receiving data, we'll be reading data on the back end. And the delete verb, of course, will be for deleting data, and the put verb will be for updating data. So that's what we're going to do. We have one URL, and we'll change the functionality via whatever the verb is we're going to send to that. So, and down here so now we've got a web service connected to a back-end database. We have a table in that database. And if we want to actually call that, the code to do that is right here. I selected C# originally, so it's going to show me some C# code, and there's actually a library here to make it easier. You could write REST code to create HTTP objects and send data, post data, or put data, or get data to that endpoint. Or you can use this library. The library has things like a mobile service client, and in the constructor, we pass it the URL of our endpoint. So I called it dgtest0804.mas.azurewebsites.net, and then every table then, they can use that to send data. So here's a class, a to-do item class, with an ID, a text, and a complete, and I can just new up one of these things and send it. This mobile service that I create up here has a get table. I can pass in my model, which is right here, and it has methods like insert async and update async and delete async. And if I just pass in some data, it'll send that to the server and do inserts and updates and deletes. And you notice I didn't actually go in there and tell it what the columns were in the table. By default, Azure Mobile is smart enough that it says if it sees these columns, ID, text, and complete, it will look in the table and it will match them. In this case, if I did an insert, it will it'll insert whatever this value is in the ID column. It'll insert whatever the text is in the text column, and it'll insert whatever the value of complete is in the complete column. And if it doesn't find that column, it'll create it. So it'll actually dynamically update your schema. So you can copy and paste this code into your application, or if you want it even easier, click Create New App and just download it, and it'll give you that application for you. It'll write all the C# code in this case. And let's open that up. And it's a zip file, so I'll extract it to the folder I have called test. C/test right here. And open this up. And it's saying, this came from the internet, do you trust it? And I'm like, yes, I trust the internet. It's full of kittens. What's not to trust? So let me really quickly build this again. I always like to build any .NET projects that I download because sometimes there are NuGet packages that have to be updated. But while it's building, I think I can go over here and look at, oh, maybe I just can't, there we go. And look at that code. So in here, you'll see code that I showed you earlier. For example, this is the startup code for a Windows application. This is a Universal Windows Platform application. And did I get errors when I built that? Is that the squiggly lines are there for a reason? But you can see right here, where am I? Right here, that here I'm instantiating this library, this mobile service client. It's coming in through a NuGet package. And it's telling it what's the endpoint. dgtest0804ma.azurewebsites.net. That's the REST service that I'm going to call. And then I have in here, I can take that object, that mobile service object called get tables, and pass in a to-do item. And if I look at the to-do item, this is my model, an ID, some text, some complete. Is complete true or false? And once I have this to-do table, then that has methods to do things like insert async, or I can use a link in this case to do a get and filter it. So if I just call to-do table, that will return all the rows in the table. If I add this lambda here, .where, this will return only the ones where complete equals false. And what else do I have down here? There's an update async. This example doesn't have an option to delete, but you can imagine what the name of that is. Of course, it's .delete async. And that's there as well. So these things are all available here. And there's similar libraries for iPhone and for Cordova and for Android. In fact, there's one for both Swift and for Objective-C. And, oh, you know what? I see what I'm doing wrong. I'm trying to deploy to a phone here. Let me actually deploy to my computer. Let's try that. The local machine. It's trying to launch an emulator that I don't have. So here we go. There's a way of adding new items to the list. Down over here, you can refresh and list any items. Of course, the table's empty right now. We just created it. But my first thing on my to-do list, I'll wake up. And automatically over, I guess I did that. I was playing with this yesterday. So there's a table there with a couple of tasks in it. I'll say wake up, get out of bed. There we go. And there's a guy from the UK here. Do you know what the next line is? It is drag a comb across my head, which is a line from a band called the Beatles. And you guys that aren't old enough to know who the Beatles are, they were a band that Paul McCartney was in. And if you're not old enough to know who Paul McCartney is, he is the guy that Kanye West sang with. So I can update it right here and change it from true to false, and because that's filtered, it's coming down. Let me get rid of these two here. I don't care about those. I got to refresh it, but there's an auto refresh in here. If you don't know who Kanye West is, he's married to Kim Kardashian. And if you don't know who Kim Kardashian is, she's the one whose stepfather is turning into a woman. So no matter how old you are, you should know somebody on that list. So this is all happening here. The libraries are just making this REST call. And because it's a REST call, you can call it from anywhere. And I only did it in .NET because that's the tools that I happen to have here. It's easier for me to show you that. But let me show you if I went back in here and said, you know what, don't do Windows. Let's do iOS. Let's do Swift code here. And we don't have to connect to a database anymore. We've already got that. We don't have to create the table. We've already got that. Let's just download an iOS app right here. And I don't have any of the tools for editing of this, but they're just text files, so just grab them. Do I need to? There it is, okay. And again, it's just going to open this thing up, and I'll unzip it to, I like to put everything in my test folder. Anybody here an iOS developer? No? Okay. Well, we're going to, I think the code is in, let me see. Base project assets, data model ID. I think it's in here. Storyboard, no. Grab this here. I'll tell you what, let me do it Android. I looked at Android yesterday and it jumped right out at me. So I'll grab this here, download an Android application. And if you dig through that, if you open that up in whatever your favorite iOS editor or Swift editor is, then you can start looking at the code and modifying it. In here, this is an Android application, so I should do extract all. And this will be some Java code that does exactly the same thing. It calls those same web services. Here's the source code, main, Java, example right there. There we go. So in here, if I open this up, let's see if that, I think that'll open in Visual Studio Code. What's going to ask me? Yeah, let's open it in Visual Studio Code. And if I scroll down in here, I think you'll see things like, here we go. Here's my mobile service client right here being declared. There's my table being declared, and down below it's going to get instantiated. And the code looks really similar because this is also a library that's built specifically for Java that abstracts away those calls to the REST services. And it makes it easy for you to write Android applications and call them from, and use them to call these backend services. So right here, I'm not a Java guy, but I can read this. Look, there's a new mobile service client. In the constructor, I'm passing in the URL of the web service endpoint. And once I have this M client here, then I can do something like get table and pass in my model right here, the to-do item. So somewhere else that to-do item is defined. And then now this M to-do table should have things to do, update and delete and insert and so on. So there we go, right? Control F, M to do table. There you go, this M to do table.update. So again, it makes it very easy. This code was all generated for me by Azure mobile apps. And so this would be, if I was writing my first Android app, this is where I would start. Because not only do I might not know about the services, but I don't even know Java code that well. Now, of course, you're not going to write an application that has a to-do table. You're going to write your own application. So you'll change your model to be customers or game scores or whatever it is that your business application does. But the same code, this is a really good guideline. You can either take and modify this application, or you can use it as guidance when you create your own application. And that frees you from having to write all that code that calls the REST service, sends JSON to it, grabs the JSON on the back end, turns it into a SQL statement. You can declaratively do authentication on here, all sorts of things. You can even do automatic authentication or automatic single sign-on, sending users to either Twitter or Facebook. So if you want to do single sign-on, you're not limited to Active Directory and Windows Live accounts. You can also automate to have them authenticate through Google or Facebook or Twitter. And Azure Mobile Apps fully supports that. All right. What else do we have here? I've already been here before. Why am I going back? Azure Mobile Apps. This is a good time for a quick review. So, mobile architecture, blah, 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 blah. There we go. Demo. So you can do this. There's also push notifications that are supported. Google and Apple and Microsoft, they all have services that do push notifications down to the client. So if you want to send a message to your Android device or to your iPhone device, then there are APIs for do that, and there are tools inside of Azure mobile apps that will support that. So a lot of things that are available, even if you're building Android and iPhone apps, that you can still take advantage of Azure and store your backend data in Azure. For automating, for DevOps things, if you want to do automated deployments or managing of resources, there are REST tools for doing that automatically. You could write REST code for do that. Most people don't. Most people would write scripts through something like PowerShell. PowerShell has been available for a long time, and the Azure PowerShell commandlets were released with when Azure was first released. And so since Azure was first introduced, that was the recommended way of managing Azure, at least in a large organization. Write some PowerShell scripts and then run those as you see fit. PowerShell's great. It's a lot easier to work with that than it is to make REST calls, but it has one disadvantage. PowerShell will only run on Windows. So if you're doing all of your management from a Mac or from a Linux machine, PowerShell won't work. However, there is something that will work. There is the CLI tools. And the CLI tools, the command line interface, I think it's called, those are available for Mac and for Linux and for Windows. So you can download them all. There are 3 different versions. You can go right here and download them, and they have a whole set of commands that they do the same thing the PowerShell commands. They wrap these REST calls. And in there, you can automatically create a virtual machine. You can add them to virtual networks. You can set security. You can do deployment. You can do auto-scaling. Pretty much anything you can do through the portal, and some things that you cannot do through the portal are available through these command line interface. And you can see some examples of the syntax here. There's full documentation on here as to what you can do. I have it installed, the Windows version installed here, so if I just go in here and just type Azure, it brings it up, and one of the last examples of really good ASCII art is available there. That's a lost art, I think. But in here you can do things like Azure account list, and see whatever Azure accounts I have registered on here. I don't think I've got any registered in here yet, but Azure account, I don't have these memorized real well, but options, account -H will always tell you what the options are. From here, you can add an account, and once you have an account, then you can start doing things like creating virtual machines, creating virtual networks, deploying web applications, and doing all your configuration through here, store them in text files, and you can run them. You run them through bash scripts on your Linux box. That's really the advantage of this here. PowerShell is still fully supported, and if your environment is all Windows, I recommend you stick with that. But if you're managing it through some Windows boxes and some Linux boxes, or all Linux boxes, CLI is the way to go. All right. Oh, and one nice thing here, I mentioned the virtual machines before. There is a whole community creating virtual machines for Azure, templates for virtual machines for Azure. So you're not limited by just the VMs that Microsoft has created. Here at vmdepot.msopentech.com, there is a whole, there are hundreds of virtual machines, 300 pages of virtual machines that are listed here, different flavors of Linux, different applications installed on them, different versions of software installed on them, and for each one of these, the deployment script is written in CLI. So right here, I'll tell it I want to install it to Eastern US, and this is the script for doing this. Azure VM create DNS prefix, blah, 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 blah. You want to replace the username and password with your username and password, but other than that, everything else should be the same. You can grab that and run that in Azure to create a new virtual machine. I did the demo already, okay. A couple of things I'll just mention. If anybody here doing big data, you are, of course. So you work with Hadoop, I bet. So Hadoop is an open source project, and it's very popular in the big data world. It's fully supported on Azure, has been since day one. And tools like Pig and Hive, the tools that people that work with big data are used to using, they're all available on Microsoft Azure. So rather than recreating the world with our big data solution, we built it on top of open source tools that are already available and people are already familiar with. Anybody doing machine learning? A little bit? All right. Machine learning, if you want to get machine learning on your resume, you'll double your salary tomorrow. It's a hot field right now. There are tools in machine learning that make it a lot easier. It used to be you had to write a lot of code to do machine learning, and now there's a graphical interface inside of Microsoft Azure that takes care of, again, the plumbing that you have to do. So rather than writing a lot of code to say, here's where my data is, and here's I want to filter it, and do some declarative things, you can drag and drop and set some properties, and that makes it a lot easier to get either, if you're new to machine learning, it makes it easier to get a new project started up. But even if you know machine learning well, it just takes care of a lot of the repetitive stuff that you're better off just letting it take care of, and then you can write custom code to do the things that are specific to your project. And that custom code is written in either R or Python. So those are the languages that are supported inside of Azure Machine Learning tools. And then once you've created one there, then you can deploy it as a web service. Once you deploy it as a web service, then it's available to any platform at all. So your iPhone can call it, or your Java applications can call it. Doesn't have to be a Microsoft platform. So all kinds of open source and compete technologies available in Azure Machine Learning. These are some tools that are really popular in the Linux world. They're starting to come to Windows as well. Docker is a big one. Docker is a platform that supports containers, and containers have been huge in the Windows or in the Linux world. They're just starting to come to Windows with Windows Server 2016, the next version of Windows. But even before they came to Windows, Docker was available on Azure. So if you wanted to have lightweight containers instead of virtual machines, you could package those up using Docker on Microsoft Azure. And Chef is a management tool that's really popular in the Linux world. That's also fully supported on Azure as well. If I haven't mentioned anything, that doesn't mean it's not there. There are a lot of things. The things that I mentioned are mostly the things that are available directly from Microsoft. But there's a lot of things that are in Azure that are produced by third parties. And I would encourage you to look at the Microsoft Marketplace. So for example, if you wanted to do a Raven database, I saw Raven was out there. They have their database as a service. There's Mongo as a service. There is things like Twilio, if you want to do text, automated voice response or texting, things like that. There are all kinds of services available in the Azure Marketplace, and they're supported on Azure, so they run on Azure. So even though they're being built by somebody else, they still can take advantage of the scalability, the reliability that Azure offers. Now, when you do this, I would encourage you to look at the pricing, just look at the fine print, because sometimes there's the cost is very different, and sometimes you may be in a program where you think you're getting free stuff, and the free stuff tends to be just the Microsoft stuff. So if you're using some third-party things like MySQL, for example, you might have to pay $3 a month for that. Just double check and read the fine print. It's different for everything. But still, it's still backed by these companies that are Oracle is backing it. These are big companies that are backing it, and it's deployed on Microsoft hardware. So it's a really nice solution for whatever you're doing. I hope. How are we doing for time? I think we're just about through it here. We have about 3 minutes left. I hope I made my message clear here, which is that this is really part of the new Microsoft. 6 or 7 years ago, this would have been unthinkable to say, here we have a Microsoft platform that supports all of this open source technology, that supports all of this compete technology, that supports, and that we've got teams that are actually pushing software out into the open source world. This is just one piece of it. Microsoft is becoming a much more open company. We're doing things like open sourcing our languages, we're open sourcing ASP.NET, we're accepting pull requests from the community, and Azure is just a part of that here. The days when Microsoft was a monolithic company that would kind of push out software every 3 years with little input from the users, those are gone. This is a very good time to be looking at Microsoft. Even if you're not using our technologies, there's still something in here for you. And I hope that's the message that you've got from this. That's what I'm trying to tell you. If you want to get more information, my first slide had my blog on it. That's my name, davidgiard.com. There's a 30-day trial on Azure you can sign up for, azure.com. The second link here is Microsoft Virtual Academy. There are dozens of courses on Azure you can look at there. The last link is the slides that you just saw here. And this one right here, this is a blog post that I wrote a while ago, which has a lot of the content that's in this, and I'll bring that up really quickly. Giard, M-A-W-M, that's Microsoft Azure without Microsoft. And on here, I've articulated a lot of the thoughts that I've given you today in here and listed them. So, without the demos. We've got about 2 minutes left. I'm going to say thank you very much, but I will stick around for any questions. Thanks a lot for coming.